So welcome to ELT in Chile, a podcast about teaching English in Chile. In this space, Kevin and I talk to teacher trainers, and academics who like to share their experiences and expertise in various aspects of English language teaching in Chile and globally. So in this video episode, we'll discuss a topic that has really caught our attention: learning design and educational technologies. So we're absolutely delighted to welcome Dr. Javier Mármol Queraltó. So thank you for accepting our invitation.
All right. Yes, Javier. Also, thank you from me for accepting this invitation. Dr. Javier Mármol Queraltó obtained his PhD from Lancaster University in 2022. His thesis examined patterns of conceptualization across English and Spanish language and images of news discourses of migration, with a focus on the 2015-16 refugee crisis. Javier has taught a variety of disciplines in higher education, specializing in critical discourse analysis, cognitive linguistics, and English for academic purposes. Javier holds teacher training MAs for both English and Spanish language, and has served as an EAP program academic coordinator at Lancaster University and head of English at Lancaster University's International Studies Center. Javier is interested in critical forms of communication, teaching and learning, and has developed a portfolio of activities spanning from ideologies and ethics and research to critical generative AI literacies. In his current career stage, Javier specialized in educational technologies discourse, which has led him to pursue a career in learning design. Javier is currently an AI-focused learning designer at the University of Southampton, where he leads and supports the design, implementation, and delivery of generative AI training resources at a strategic level. Javier is EDI champion, and he works with Migrants' Rights Network as ambassador and advisory group secretary. Well, Javier, welcome again to this podcast. And if I may dive right into the first question. Your PhD explored the conceptualization of migration during the 2015-16 refugee crisis. What first drew you to migration discourse and critical discourse analysis, if I may ask?
Thank you, Kevin, for this question. It's always very interesting to think back to where everything has started, right? Like, I think between the three of us, we accumulate possibly like 15 different degrees at different levels at university. So I started teaching Spanish as a second language and as a first language also when I was doing my master's back in Spain in 2012. And the focus on migration discourse was primarily stemming from an interest of sharing my culture through language. Interestingly enough, I was doing a practical kind of like experience with town hall in a place called Roquetas de Mar in the south east of Spain, which is very close to Almeria, and it has a very high number of migrants, basically. And so I was working there teaching newly arrived migrants Spanish, basically as an integrative vehicle, which is the kind of thing that I used to do. Interestingly enough, during that summer, there were riots in the city, and I saw the riots in first person. There were also a couple of murders during that very summer, and the representation of what happened in the media was substantially different to how things happen, right? So that was the start of something that has started brewing in terms of what happened there, what is the media telling us, and what is the actual uptake when it comes to social understandings of migration. So then I did a master's in language sciences, and I started looking at discourse analysis and critical discourse analysis the way that we do it now. My supervisor in that case was now Vice Dean of the Open University in Spain, Laura Alba Juez, and she focused a lot on contextual factors of discourse analysis. And so I was doing that master's when the Brexit referendum and all the campaigns were taking place in the south of the UK. So let's say that thread made me think about how people and processes were represented from a critical perspective. And that led me into doing the PhD in Lancaster University with Professor Chris Hort, who specializes in discourses of migration.
Wow. So you literally went with the pulse of time, so to speak, from the events in Spain over to what then became the Brexit campaign and the vote. That's eventful. In your view, how do images and language work together in shaping public perceptions of migrants and refugees? I remember from my own experience during the years leading up to the finalization of Brexit and also before the referendum, that there were quite disturbing images being used by certain camps in the Brexit debate. So maybe you can tell us a bit more about how how this works together, language and images.
I mean, it's a very complex question because in discourse analysis, usually you tend to isolate modes so you can understand them better, right? It's much easier and also conducive to better understandings of how things work if you separate things. You need to make concessions, right? The beauty of cognitive linguistics in this sense is that you can examine language and images not at the same level, but at the conceptual level. So when it comes to, my focus was news discourse. So news discourse tends to be understood and theorized as not reproductive of reality, but reproductive of political discourses. There is this information flow. Politician X says something, the newspaper reports it, and then it just flows back into it. I think one of the examples that you're mentioning might be the tipping point campaign by our loved and politician, now very prominent in the UK, Nigel Farage.
Yes.
I used to teach in Lancaster University discourse analysis, the multimodality section of it, using the British National Party leaflets because that's very interesting.
That was the precursor to the Reform UK movement, wasn't it?
So you had Britain First, the British National Party. There were quite a few more that then were banned because they were deemed white supremacist groups. And Reform, and I think now we have another one called Restore, are
some
basically
synonyms.
that you seem very interesting and ways to represent what they want to do, which is, but going back to the question, language is a very important and very useful vehicle for the communication and of ideologies, right? Newspapers, one way or another, they're going to carry ideologies, and ideologies are a basic aspect of communication. There is always a perspective to be told. Nothing is neutral. One of the most interesting things that I can say from the language-image combination is that images as well, they carry a very important ideological aspect in that they're mainly perspectivized. So I think when people look at an image and then they try to connect the language, the event. So we're talking about representation of events, right? The same event, you can describe it linguistically in many different ways. And the same you can do with an image. You can take a photo from this perspective or from this perspective or from this perspective. So cognitive linguistics, in that sense, is very useful because it creates an apparatus from which we can examine if language and image, in one way or another, they either converge, they diverge, or they're telling something completely different, and the nuances that we can see between them, right? So that was primarily what I did in my thesis, like trying to look at the relationship between language, mainly headlines, subheadings, and the first paragraph of a newspaper article, and the image that we had. Very difficult data to look at because you're looking at examples in which there is. I looked at particularly the Telegraph and the Guardian because I wanted to see how different newspapers look at things differently. And in Spain, I looked at El País and El Mundo, which are center-right, center-left. It's very interesting to look at things from that perspective because the image usually what it does is tells you a very specific snapshot of an event that the newspaper article then elaborates on. A very prominent example that maybe some of you remember is the scene of the death of Aylan Kurdi. There was this child that was washed off in, I think it was in Bodrum or in Lesbos, and the newspapers really represented that in a way that was calling for the acceptance that the crisis was actually really, really, really big and really large in terms of numbers. But what you see there is basically an entity that has no agency whatsoever. So the language was representing the event as a lack or as a moral decay of the European Union, but the image was very, very hyper-focused on something that was really sad.
Yeah.
Then you had many other events that focused much more on the arrival of people to different countries, but not on the departure. So this aspect of perspectivization in cognitive linguistics, they call it windowing of attention, linguistically and visually was very interestingly focused on the arrival of people and the impact of that arrival. So yeah, I can talk about this for hours. So
yeah. I mean,
it is quite interesting. I didn't want to stop you there. And I think there's a lot of parallels as well between countries and situations and influx of people who are born in a different place.
Absolutely.
And where they live.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we can see the same like happening here in Chile. And now, Javier, if we look at today's media landscape, do you think that migration discourses have really changed significantly since the refugee crisis, or do you think that maybe some similar patterns are re-emerging or reappearing?
Well, I think that I would like to say that they are different things.
Yeah.
But the reality of what I see is that we're seeing the reproduction of the same conceptual archetypes.
Yeah.
We're not seeing particularly different tropes.
Yeah.
We're seeing similar metaphors. Even more in Trump's discourse, the metaphors that we're seeing now are literally a copycat of what we used to see in the 1940s and 30s in Nazi Germany, very plainly speaking. There is an article from Charlotte Rose Kennedy. I think she studied 100 years of metaphors in newspaper discourse in the UK. And the patterns that she found, this is a very prominent corpus linguist, she found the same patterns across 100 years of The Guardian, for example. So I think we're seeing there are many different tools that you can examine, or that you can use to examine migration discourse across the different CDA approaches that we have. The one that is very widely used, even more from a systemic functional linguistic perspective, is the topos from Ruth Wodak, evidently. It's like one of the most important CDA and practitioners in ever. We have the topoi of invasion, we have the topoi of contribution, the topoi of threat. Those all have been systematically being used without exception in every single newspaper I've been seeing in the last 10, 15 years. Some of them are very nuanced, and instead of using metaphors that are really evocative of negative framings, they focus more on all the aspects of events. For example, how they're constructed. In cognitive linguistics, this is called schematization. How is the event constructed? So it might not be what people do, but it might be the way that people move across countries, or it might be the way in which they have some kind of like force dynamic implementation in the action. So it would be amazing if we had seen a counter discourse that had been strong enough to counteract those discourses. But the reality is that newspapers and politicians are using the same language to speak about people that come from very different backgrounds and very different experiences. And I went to Berlin only a few weeks ago, and it was very interesting to see there are so many memorials in Berlin, evidently. It's a very historically intense city. And one of the things that really shocked me was one section of the wall was a memorial about the Gestapo and newspapers. And the language that they were representing in this memorial was very similar to what we see now in the American media, particularly in the far-right one. So same tropes for very, I would like to say, different times, but I think it's very cyclical.
All right.
Yeah.
Yes, no, as they say, history repeats itself, don't they? And this obviously probably goes hand in hand with the discourses around certain world events that have a more repetitive character. Right. You've worked extensively in both cognitive linguistics and critical discourse analysis, right? How do these two approaches complement each other in your research?
So that is possibly one of the most interesting things that anybody can study when they're doing critical discourse analysis. I think like one of the main claims of CDA using the acronym is that discourse is constitutive of social realities and vice versa. We have a cyclical and a circular argument, which doesn't really, it has some flaws, right? We have many different approaches. I'm not going to enumerate them because evidently I understand that the public will understand this stuff. The one that I started working with was the social cognitive approach. I was a Van Dyke fan for many years, until I started studying more the actual cognitive underpinnings of discourses. For me, CDA and cognitive linguistics have a very interesting area of connection, which is the mediation aspect of it. So discourse is language in use. Societies are a very complex topic that evolves, and there is some kind of mediator that has to be language or something. But language doesn't really happen in isolation. It happens in the sociological realm, but also in the cognitive realm. It's how we actually perceive things. And the way in which the mind perceives language stems from the way in which the mind perceives realities that are physically happening. So CDA, which is cognitive linguistics critical discourse analysis, focuses on one specific concept, which is called conceptualization. Also, some people call it construal. And this is a meaning-making process evoked in the mind of social groups with by linguistic and other modes of communication. So systemic functional linguistics, which is one of the most prominent theories in linguistics right now, lacks in some aspects. One of them, for example, is the formulation of metaphor, which is such an important ideological tool. So I think there are two articles from the early 2000s that are really, really important in this case. You have one from Paul Tilton, 2005, and Wodax in 2006. And both of them are saying something similar. We know what we're doing, but we need some kind of mediator to explain why the perpetuation and reproduction of these social realities happen the way they do. What does manipulation look like in the mind, right? How does this actually happen at a cognitive level? And that's where CLCDS is really important here. The idea here is that language use is viewed as contextualized sets of prompts. Your brain is simulating events when you are prompting it with different words or different combinations of words or constructions. And that's where conceptualization, which is like the running of the model, actually happens. So, and that's why Gen AI is so interested in many different aspects, because it's not really doing what it should be doing. Well, that's something we can talk later. But yes, CLCDS.
Sorry, just to jump in. Is that, or does that go along the lines of, I tell you to think about a tool and you automatically think of a blue hammer?
For example. So yes, because
does that fall under this category, just to make it a bit more tangible?
Yes. So something that is taught in basic levels of cognitive linguistics is the theory of the basic level, right? So if you ask people across, I don't know, 25 different cultures, what is their prototype of dog, then different cultures are going to tell you different types of dogs. But the dog itself is going to be relative to the context in which the people are saying that thing. So one of my students, I love this study, that this student was really, really good. And she was from Hong Kong. And she decided to compare 50 of her friends in the UK and 50 of her friends in Hong Kong. And the question was the same. What is your prototype of dog? Most people in the UK would say the type of dog would be, just to see if any of it we get it, would be a Labrador.
Yeah.
Right? A Golden Retriever.
Yeah.
What do you think would be the basic level for the prototype of dog in Hong Kong? Any guesses?
Oof.
It's like a Chihuahua.
A poodle.
It was a Chihuahua. Well done.
Yeah.
And the hypothesis of the student was this has to do, at least at some level, with the space available for pets. Right?
I was thinking
it tells
of a poodle. Of a poodle,
exactly.
A small dog.
So this whole uptake of cognitive psychology theories into linguistics tells us that there are things that are social, but there are many things that are particularly cognitive. So one of the best quotes that I can remember from my supervisor, Chris Hart, is that we are cave people living in the digital world. yes, we can try to get dressed and look as smart as we do, and we have all these devices, but our mind is literally that of a person that was 20,000 years ago. It was in a cave. So manipulation, language, we are using mechanisms that are much more basic than we really think they are. And cognitive linguistics gives you the basis to examine how that happens, to formulate theories of how people might understand something, so you can actually formalize in a way manipulation. And you can also test how these things might change, because we can compare how the perception of a metaphor in comparison to another one might actually take an effect on different groups of population. So I invite the readers and the listeners to go and read articles by Matteo Fuoli and Chris Hart on this area, because they're really contributing to CLCDS from an experimental perspective.
Absolutely. I mean, that sounds incredible. Yeah. Also very interesting. I mean, yeah. And also the study that you were mentioning, that this is something like, probably if we run the same experiment here in Chile, would be probably a German Shepherd. Probably that would be my guess.
Perhaps, yeah.
Yes, but I would say, yeah, it would depend on that. But I think now I would like to know, Javier, maybe there was you moved from one area to another, because now you're working something that's more related to learning design and educational technologies. So what motivated this big shift in your professional trajectory? What happened there?
What happened there? 2022 was a tumultuous year, that's for sure. So I've always been curious about the way in which technology has an impact in the way that we perceive things.
Yeah.
Right. So when I was doing my thesis, one of the most interesting things that I read, I had to do a bit of research on media ecologies.
Yeah.
And there is this British researcher, Logan, who defines societies not by the way in which they communicate, by the way in which they engage with technology. So the quote goes as something like, the limits of perception, the limits of societies are not limits of physical realities. They're limits of perception. And perception is mediated by the technologies in which societies are embedded. I found that fascinating. And I was very lucky to, on the one hand, as Kevin was saying mentioning before, I've been working in the EAP sphere for 6 years. In 2020, we had to pivot to fully online teaching in the space of 6 months. I work with Helena Stakonis, Laura Stiefenhofer, and Evelyn Nikolova, that has been also here in your podcast. And we created, using the Microsoft suite of applications, we created one of the best courses that I think has been done in Lancaster University from that perspective. So we really had to dive deep into how do we use technology to replicate, in as much as possible, the learner experience that we wanted them to have. Very challenging. It was beautiful. Many hours of work. But when I finished my PhD, it's also true that the topic that I chose, as we have been discussing, is very taxing. Emotionally, it's very taxing. All my family, except for my parents, are migrants in the UK. My partner now is a British migrant in Germany, ironically. All my friends are migrants in one way or another. So I decided to take a bit of a step aside and focus on something that was as interesting, but with a little bit more of respect for my own mental health. I still continue to work with the Migrant Rights Network. It's a charity in London that does a lot of research on language and ideology, but it's on a consultancy basis. I was really lucky, really fortunate in between 2020 and 2023 to work with Jania Komljenovic, Sam Seller, and Keith Birch in an international project funded by the ESRC, and it was focusing on educational technologies. So one of our colleagues from Lancaster University put me in contact with Jania, and she wanted to do this critical discourse analysis of venture capitalists within the area of educational technologies focusing on higher education. And I created a report, etc., etc. And I found it very interesting because there was a lot of mention of AI, these invisible drivers that were propelling the market, the promise for scalability, personalization. So that really attracted me because I realized that what I had been doing on discourse analysis, focusing on migration discourse, was perfectly and very interestingly transferable to other areas of discourse. When I finished my PhD, I was very tired of academia. Like I agree that it's a very intellectually stimulating place to work. I love that. But I really don't like publishing. It's something that I just cannot really be bothered with. So I focused on something a bit more practical, if you may say so. So what I'm doing right now is working with academics. They are the subject matter experts. I am the person that gives shape to the experience that they want to present to the student. And my focus is really student-centered. So I want students to have the best they can get from the resources that we have at the university. And that goes by making or creating or curating learning experiences that are accessible, innovative, and inclusive. Because the university here in Southampton it has a very big emphasis on widening participation and mobility of students. So it's a very social university in that sense. So it was a good place to come and start that area of a career that I was proving quite interesting as well. And now they focus on AI.
Well, I mean, and probably right now that you're working as a learning designer, which is, with this focus on AI, probably I think this is something that we're all experiencing. Challenges. So in your opinion, Javier, what are the biggest challenges that universities are facing right now regarding generative AI? Maybe not only in Southampton, but maybe this can apply to other realities as well.
I think what I'm going to say is, it's only my perspective. Sure. It's also important to know that every university is really struggling to ride the wave or to serve it's quite a complex one. I went with one of my main collaborators. Name is Pete Borman. I will be saying his name a few times because we do things together mostly. Right. We attended one of the first AI-focused conferences on assessment. Is the future-facing learning an AI conference in Middlesbrough when I think it was like a month and a half ago, and everything is moving very slowly. There is the reluctance to act from an academic perspective is really big, and the problem is that the market and the drive for the adoption of AI tools is so big that universities are really struggling to keep up with it. So I would say that the main challenges would be, first, optionality. How many universities in the UK are now struggling to keep the numbers up to the standard that they need to continue with the activities the way that they need them? I'm going to say that the ones that are not might be like 3. It might be UCL, Oxford, Cambridge, but the rest of universities are really struggling with that. So opting out of something that is potentially making the business easier, at least on a professional level or on a administrative level, is quite complex. Universities are, all of them, one way or another, married to a organization. It might be Google, it might be Microsoft, it might be others, but mostly Microsoft and Google. Most, if not maybe like 90% of them, all universities in the UK, they are Microsoft universities. So Microsoft, in the way that is rolling out Copilot, which is their Gen AI tool, it's particularly invasive because it is not that you can choose to use it. It's just everywhere, in every single application, right? So we have the aspect of optionality. Very few, the people that are making the decisions as to say we use it or not, they're making decisions premised on something that is not particularly academic. Then we have the problem of governance. And the problem of governance for me is particularly interesting because we're in a model of rentership. We're not buying anything. This is something that I learned when I was working with Janya and Sam and Keith. And universities don't own anything. We're renting spaces. They might be digital. They might be physical. And the way in which we own or we decide if we own parts of applications, that is something that is not up to us. So when you are a Microsoft university, where you have access to all these applications, Copilot is another application, for example. But the way in which the models, the large language models that are the backbone of all these different tools, there is no governance on them whatsoever. There is opacity as to how they are trained, how they are created, the data that it's being used or scraped or stolen, we don't know, where the servers are located, what might be the repercussions of having different data centers in different places. All the universities in the UK have signed a net zero agreement. So there are many aspects of governance there that are really complex. And then we have, evidently, the push for employability. The value of AI within the employability market is increasing. So if you have a look at the last reports on the impacts and expectations of AI within pretty much every market, they're really high. So the expectation is that students come out of the degrees knowing how to do A, B, C, D, and AI. So universities are really being pushed towards adopting that. The technological readiness of many universities and the digital capabilities across staff are incredibly varied. So it's a very big disruptor of an already quite shaken cradle, if we want to think it like that. And then last but not least, I would say that is the perception of the students. AI is very interesting, depending on what discipline you might be in. You might be really happy to go and start learning what is machine learning, how you do this, how you do that. But my experience with, for example, humanities students, which is quite recent here in Southampton, is that they don't want to use it. So the value of education, the added value or withdrawal of that value to education, depending on the discipline, is going to have a very important impact. So I think we should be listening to students a bit more than what we are now. And I think the reports that are coming out, the HEPI report from a couple months ago, it was saying the same. It's like students need to be listened more. I'm going to stop it there. But I think optionality, governance, a student agency, and basically that drive, that push from the market is quite big.
That's really interesting. If I can just take you up on one aspect that you mentioned that quite surprised me. You said that particularly students in the humanities are not very much keen on using AI. This somehow contrasts with the things you read and hear all over the place, where people complain that students are using AI for their academic writing, AI for everything. Introspective. I don't use that much AI or anything wherever I can avoid it. But how does that relate? So is that group of humanities, are we the discipline that try and keep thinking alive and not relying too much on technology? Or do you have any thoughts on that? I'm obviously not challenging what you say. I'm just trying to understand it.
It's a very good question. And my experience comes from two specific anecdotes. So this is more my take on this. I've been to a handful of conferences over the last 6 months. And I've seen this, I would say it's a thread, right? So I've listened the same topic about history students, history and geography, for example. History is told. History represented. History has to be written. So if you give the power of social representation to an AI, epistemologically, you're actually destroying a discipline. And history students were really aware of that. I think that's a really good job in critical thinking and literacies that the professors that were describing this doing in the country, in the institutions. This is Leeds and UCL. The example from Southampton comes directly from the Linguistics and English Language Department. The value of AI for them in contrast with creativity is very interesting. And the same happens with the students from art. We did something that we have developed, my colleague Peter and I, over the last year and a half, is an event that we have called or coined Promptathon, in which we basically bring students into a room, and for a whole day we do a hackathon-inspired gamified event to basically teach them how it works and how to be critical about it. And it was very interesting because we did this whole event with art and design students from Winchester School of Art, which is really good. And the last activity that we ask them to do is, okay, you've learned how it works. I mean, in a day, there's so much you can teach. But we asked them to create an infographic or a poster explaining to other students how to use or not use Gen AI. And the interesting bit here was that they have access to all the AI tools that you can think of for creative arts. They didn't want to use them because they understand the creativity and their own inspiration needs to come from within. And that's something that I found extremely helpful, because when it comes to creating a logo, there is something that, or a logo or whatever, there are aspects that AI is going to do really well, but the kind of like the substance, the humanity in them, that is something that students appreciate.
Yes.
Yeah. And I find that quite helpful because some students need to use it. For example, if you are an engineering student, well, possibly you're going to do vibe coding for this and that because you need to create an application. But students that don't really need to do that, they value the process more than the actual outcome. And that ties also with the type of assessment that the universities are suffering to maintain, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah. But this is sort of like anecdotal, Kevin, if that makes you feel better.
That is super interesting. It gives me a little bit of hope, to put it that way. But then when and where we have to use it, which seems to become an ever-growing field, there is a lot of discussion around AI literacy and critical AI literacy. From your perspective, what do we mean by critical AI literacy, and what does it involve?
That's a very good question, because I had this conversation with my colleague Pete this morning thinking, okay, how do we pin this down? It's not an easy thing to do. We have an overlap of things here. So from my perspective, literacy is underpinned by capabilities, what you can do in very broadly. Critical literacy is more underpinned by university skills in terms of what you can do with language and the way that you think, this criticality being a critical thinker, right? So critical AI literacy, for me at least, and this is a working definition because we haven't really written anything about this just yet, is the intersection between developing digital skills. We see it needs to be the backbone of all this. You need to know how technology works in the first place. Developing critical skills, and I'm talking specifically about higher education or school critical skills, how to write, how to think, how to argument, how to and basically destroy or support an argument with evidence, how to spot what is evidence, what is a symptom, what is symptomatic, all these kind of things that we do, and we cannot take them for granted, even more in the societies that we're living now. And the third area is developing this understanding of how information flows are fundamentally changing. And we have Gen AI as a huge disruptor to how information is now produced. I like to bring it back always to Luhmann, the German philosopher from the great philosopher from the 1900s. So we have the block society from the 1920s and 30s. Then we have the transition into the liquid society. And now we have the digital society. So I don't know what Luhmann would be saying about what we're seeing now. Hopefully, possibly he will be like scratching his coffee or something. But we need to slow down in a way. We cannot expect the students to learn how everything works within 3 years of their lives when nobody understands them. So we need to slow down because we need to understand the repercussions of technologies. What I said before, this idea of technologies are the dictators of how we perceive realities. So students are learning in different ways to the way that we used to learn. The way in which we are producing and reproducing information is substantially different over the last 15 years. So students need to know how to understand what is real or not in a world where the difference between AI generated and reality is blurred to the extreme.
And it becomes more blurry by the day, it feels sometimes.
It does. That all mediated by a screen that might be the size of my palm, that comes with a specific number of pixels that allow you to express very complex realities, and is manipulable, right? So yeah, going back again to the thing that I said before, we're cave people in a digital world, right? So critical AI literacy is now emerged as a very interesting topic, because it's that convergence between this tradition of critical thinking that we have upheld in the UK for 500 years, understand the facts, pin down the evidence, and then adjust your reality according to what you have found. Digital capabilities, that I'm very happy to talk about that, which is quite a lot of focus in learning design. And then we have Gen AI to basically destroy or reshape, for better or worse, and the way in which we communicate and we flow in societies, right? So it's a very complex topic. I think it's going to be the topic of many, many articles to come in the next few years.
Sure, absolutely. I mean,
it's really interesting what you just said with the way students these days learn is fundamentally different from the way that we used to learn, including the three of us, being of a relatively similar age. But then everything seems to be tailored towards AI, and everything seems to be thrown at the student. And if you don't use AI, then you're not an attractive provider of information resources. If you don't incorporate AI into your syllabus, then you're somehow left behind, or your students feel left behind. And then at the same time, you have this steep increase of generative AI in education. And almost simultaneously, your students give up. And that's something that that I think we in education have been working on for the past, I don't know, since the 1980s, 1970s, student agency. And it feels like students are voluntarily giving up on their agency, because now there's a tool that produces nice sentences. I wouldn't go further than that, especially when we talk about Gen AI, which often is the case that it doesn't go any further than nice sentences, in my experience. So that's quite a difficult trend to stay up to date with and really know what to do about it, right?
Absolutely. And I think, let's say, well, Javier was mentioning some challenges, but I think, let's say, there are also maybe opportunities / I don't know, risks, right? Especially, I think maybe when students need to produce, for example, when we have assessment and maybe in the areas of academic writing. So Javier, how do you think universities, or what would be your opinion on that, like balance the opportunities, risks, well, digital risks, maybe ethical risks, for example, in the areas of academic writing and, of course, assessment, which is, I think they have been really significantly transformed or maybe impacted by the disruption of AI, or generative AI.
This is the question that everybody wants the answer for, right? It's like, how do we do assessment now? Please give me something to hold on to. I mean, this is possibly the most difficult question I'm going to be asked today, and I hope that's the case. But assessment has always, from my perspective, in the time that I've been working in academia and I've been a student, assessment has always been disconnected from the learning. Right? So this is I've studied in the UK across 3 different universities, in Spain across another 3. Write an essay. Tell me what you think. And for me, that works, because I'm a really good adult thinker. So I love giving presentations. I love writing essays. But we have this perception of language as the ultimate way in which someone can express the knowledge they have managed to gather from a very complex topic. That's something that happens a lot in the humanities. It can be an artifact, and if we're talking about math or some other disciplines, it can be quite different. But my specialization has always been the humanities. So how do we use Gen AI in a way that we are benefiting students, and while we need to train everybody that is using Gen AI? I don't know in your institutions, but in my institution, we are now starting to train people what AI is, how do we use it, And how do we use it? And I really like that you mentioned this, ethically.
Yeah.
Right? And what are we outsourcing? The concept of cognitive offload and cognitive atrophy that we see a lot now in the research, I think we need to be very careful with how we see that, because there are a few very big headlines that have been reproduced in the media. We don't have enough data yet to really ascertain if the impact of Gen AI on learning processes is the way that a few papers in the US have said. I am very skeptical of that. There are many people doing educational research that are not educational researchers as well.
Yeah.
Everybody is doing the bit, and that's my experience also in conferences. You go and everybody has something to say about the impact of Gen AI using tools they've never used before. So everybody's trying to find some certainty in this area. I think assessment needs to be directly related to the way in which we want students to be able to be themselves when they come out of university. I'm very rose tainted in this aspect, but I think university is a place where people come to be, where people come to learn, when people come to develop, and that's what I did. I did my PhD not because I wanted to be a professor; it would have been amazing, but because I wanted to learn and I wanted to be tested. I wanted to be challenged, right? And that's my way of doing it. There are many other students that come to university and they just want a degree so they can go and work and provide for themselves or their families, and that is every option is fine. But the responsibility of universities, and I think the universities in the UK have one of the biggest ones because of the tradition that they carry on their shoulders, to be an example of how to do this. So I work for Southampton. Southampton is one of the founding members of the Russell Group. In 2023, we were one of the collaborators of the principles of AI in academia. And I think two of them, which are the ones that always come to mind, is we must be able to teach students how to thrive in a Gen AI world. And we need to be able to train our staff to also thrive in a Gen AI powered world. But what is that supposed to mean?
Yeah.
Because what is that world?
Yeah.
The AI of now or the AI of next year?
Next year, which is going to be potentially even like, I don't know, bigger or faster, or we don't even know, like also the way it's growing.
You have these models, like there are so many headlines about these models. You have Mythos, you have this, GPT 5.5, the one that they come, and the possibilities, the things that they can do are absolutely crazy. How do we reconcile that with basically with the endeavor of universities, right? So I think this aspect of ethics is we need to take 500 steps back and think, what do we want to do with universities? What is the value of universities and what is the value of the education they provide? How do we connect assessment to this, which is possibly the $1 million question? We want authentic assessment. We want things that people can actually take and transfer to the real contexts. For me, writing an essay was an exercise, an intellectual exercise. I don't go around writing essays to people. Okay, it would be quite an interesting thing to do, but it's not the case. So at Southampton, for example, we've been having a project called Advancing Assessment, which Gen AI came into the equation literally halfway through, and the university really thought we need to think back. And we need to think about how we do this for our students. So the university does something that I particularly like. We have co-design panels. So we have a bunch of students that they can be contacted and they come and work with us, not for us, they work with us. So we understand what is happening from their perspectives. So this also goes back to assessment that is going backwards, because how many of you have heard we need to go back to oral exams? We don't know exactly what the students are doing in the houses. They're outsourcing the writing. They don't know what they're doing. They're just writing, and they're asking the AI, and then we don't know if they know what they know, right? So we need to ask them. And they need to come, and they need to tell us, what about international students and language and command? What about students that have different ways of dealing with realities, neurodivergencies, disabilities and everything. We've had a number of cases in the UK of those situations being particularly negative for students. So being, and we're talking like the worst outcome possible for a student in these situations. So what AI can allow you to do is actually to tailor everything that you do to many different audiences. So the promise of personalization and scalability is not empty. And this is something that I've done, for example, in my current role. So I can give you an example of an application of Gen AI that you might find interesting. We have one very interesting professor, Robert Shannon. He's a doctor in physiotherapy. And every year, physiotherapy gets more and more students in the course. It's very difficult for 5 people teaching that course to give feedback to 500 students every 2 weeks. Impossible. So here is where Gen AI can actually do something for us. So we implemented a solution in which the students do something on Teams, then they take a transcript of something they've done, and they take it back to Blackboard Ultra, which is our VLE of choice. And Blackboard Ultra has many different AI tools. So we have managed to create a workflow in which a student responds to a video, takes the transcript of what they've done, they take it to Blackboard, and there is an AI persona that we have created only using books that the professor has told us that they are the right ones, and that is the machine that is giving feedback to students. Satisfaction has gone through the roof, because from not getting any kind of personalized feedback to being able to do things in your own time. And this is an emotional discourse, because it was about supporting patients after quitting smoking, which some people might relate to this. So it's quite an interesting topic to see.
No idea what you're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. So Gen AI there, working with the feedback that we got from the students. We want more interaction, but evidently it's not possible. The professor being interested, how do we implement this? And after several rounds of piloting, is something that we are rolling out in many more courses. So can it work? Yes, but you need to do it in a way that it's ethical. We need to look at how do we train this? And there are so many things that we need to do yet. Like there are so many frameworks that we can apply to this. But yeah, professional service is always 3 steps ahead. We want to be really efficient. Academics are more skeptic by nature, because that's what we do. No?
I think that's also a really interesting metaphor comes to mind there. To not jump on the bandwagon, right? Because everyone seems to blindly, or not everyone, but a lot of institutions, a lot of programs seem to be jumping blindly on that bandwagon. So if we are going back to my comment from earlier, if we don't incorporate AI, then we will be left behind. Our students will feel left behind.
Absolutely.
And then you ask the question, but what does it actually mean? And do you know what's happening? And why do we need this? And a lot of people can't really answer this question. It's just this huge buzzword that's, I don't know, a couple of years ago, that was innovation. Everything was all of a sudden innovative and needed to be innovated. And, you know, I think there's a lot of wheels now that were reinvented during that time. And now it's AI, the big buzzword. And unless we do AI, we're not worth our right to exist. It's like, no, it's funny, right? But now I think the world we live in is now moving towards AI use more and more, and I think it would be really difficult, if at all possible, to reverse that. Now, Javi, the $1 million question here would be, in your experience, in this context in which we work, live, study, and try and thrive, as you said before, what digital capabilities will become essential for both students and teachers over the next 5 years? What do we need to develop to adapt to this time and this trend in education?
That's a good question, because I had this conversation with my colleague Pete this morning, and we were like, we're in a bit of disagreement. So the framework that we tend to use in learning design is the one created by the organization JISC, that maybe you've heard about it. I always forget what the acronym stands for. But they do digital education, and they create all the frameworks, and they're really good. I used to work with one of the senior researchers back in the day when I was working in Lancaster. So JISC in one of their iterations of frameworks, has created 6 digital capabilities that are essential for the modern world. They are digital proficiency and productivity, information, data, and media literacies, digital creation, problem solving, and innovation, digital communication, collaboration, and participation. And then we have digital learning and development. And last but not least, we have digital identity and well-being. And in conversation with my colleague, we were in agreement that there were 3 that are of paramount importance. And we are thinking always from a perspective of student-centered perspective, like how identity building and things like that. So for me, and this is possibly one of the things that crops through because of my background, is information, data, and media literacies. So students, and also us, we need to learn more about how information is managed, how data is managed, what data is where, how is the data, what are data cycles, how does the university itself actually manage the data. I work with many people on cybersecurity right now, so it's quite interesting having these conversations. We don't know what the model is doing, and we don't know what the weights are, but we're going to trust it.
Yes.
And media literacies, right? So we're asking students to potentially produce different artifacts that might have more relevance to their particular context or situation, that might include blogs or whatever. So learning how media literacies are evolving in the last 20 years is really important for them. The second one, and this is something that is also, it resonates a lot with employability markets, is soft skills, but with a digital take. Communication, collaboration, and participation. How many of you receive an email from a student that it looks like it's texting a friend?
Yes.
This is a,
many times.
So it's a very...
So many times.
Sorry, I'm laughing. I had that discussion in the morning. Yes.
So we're seeing these lines of how an etiquette might be blurred and things like that. So it's quite interesting because for us it's quite shocking, but is the rule of thumb for many people, right? So, but then when you come to a working environment, that's a completely different thing. And the last, for me, and this is because I think the aspect of identity building is really important, is digital identity and well-being. Learning how to keep safe and how to take care of others in a digitally evolving world. And we all know many cases of how technology can be really good for many different things, but it can also be extremely detrimental for individuals.
Quite harmful,
So I think that's my 3. Information, data, and media literacies, soft skills with a digital flavor to them, and then digital identity and well-being. And you can thread all this in your design. I don't know if you've heard about Universal Design for Learning from the CAST group in the US.
No.
I would recommend that you have a look, because they have created this framework of agent learner with 9 different areas relating to everything you can think of in terms of context, personality, and divergences. And they bring it all together in a digital environment. And it's a very powerful framework to enable all these things to happen. So, I think that's a rounded answer.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Yes.
Yes. I think we just have a question from the audience. Like, this question was asked by Constanza, who I know. So she told me, it's like, you need to ask this question. I said, yes, I will. So the question is, how do you envision the evolution of learning design in this new AI mediated educational environments? As we've been discussing, AI reshapes how students learn and produce knowledge. What should learning designers now prioritize measuring, assessing, and developing beyond just traditional instructional design frameworks? Javier, what would you say to that?
That's when I was checking the question online, I was like, that's a tricky one, because I have to make I have to admit something, that is, I don't really believe in data metrics when it comes to instructional design. So I think we need to create activities or experiences for students where we can track processes.
Yeah. All right.
I'm not particularly interested if a student can tick a box.
Like metrics, like as you were saying. Yes.
Exactly. So I think that's a symptom of engagement. But how do we define digital engagement? Is also a completely different bag of issues, right? Yes. So I'd say that AI learning design can very easily focus on process tracking. What are students doing?
Yeah.
You can ask a student to copy the whole thread of a conversation they had with whichever Gen AI tool, and that is something quite interesting. Focusing on developing skills rather than being goal oriented. This is something that we all know from the literature. Like this is, but that aspect of I'm going to focus on how I teach students to do something, not to produce something. I find that really powerful. Me in particular and my colleagues, we are doing a lot of AI-powered learning design.
Yeah.
Most of the platforms that I use Rise 360, Blackboard, they all have now some kind of AI tools. And we use them. We are aware of the repercussions of using them. But something that is very interesting in learning design when you start working on it is like there is no time for anything. And you're always depending on the decision made by a subject matter expert, usually in the shape of an academic, right?
Yeah.
So, yes, we use AI-powered design for time saving, but we need to be very transparent and open to the conversation of why, for what purpose, and what are the potential impact on our own processes when it comes to designing things.
Yeah.
So I use Gen AI very frequently, but I have the most obscure conversations with it. I'm not going to lie, because I try to break it every single time. And for me, that's part of the process, because it's not human. This has no feelings. I'm going to try to break it, right?
To break it.
So yeah, from my perspective, accountability, we use AI to design things, but we're also possibly enabling students to use AI to answer to things.
Yeah.
We need to be really transparent. So quantitative metrics only go so far. I think the AI tools allow you to do many things, but you can trick pretty much everything right now. We are not in a technological readiness level and at which we can say this is created by Gen AI and this is created by a person. And the same goes for pretty much everything that we're thinking in academia now. So I think that's the elephant in the room. We don't know what it is, but it's always an alter AI in the room, someone taking notes.
Yes.
So I hope that I answered at least partially to Constanza's question.
Absolutely. Yeah. So with this, I think we can start to maybe finishing our episode. It was very interesting conversation, Javier. So thank you very much for accepting, Kevin and my invitation. So so we would like to conclude today's episode of ELT in Chile podcast with Dr. Javier Mármol Queraltó. So thank you very much, Javier, for helping us understand. Also try to understand, what's happening with not only learning design, maybe your own work, Javier, which is very interesting. And also how maybe, again, like this is something that we've been maybe discussing with all our guests, maybe to meet again in a year, 2 years to see what has happened, because this is going to continue to evolve. So yes, Kevin, I don't know if you'd like to add something.
See what sort of conversation we will be having in about 2 years about the same topic.
Maybe we're not going to be here. It's going to be me, an avatar talking. Maybe it's not going to be us.
Yeah, I try that. It's horrible.
No, absolutely.
I hope not.
I think it works in a movie, but probably in real life it does not work.
My accent doesn't sound like that.
Holograms would be nice, though.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you so much as well from me, Javier. This was really interesting, and thanks for volunteering your evening.
I appreciate your time, and I also appreciate the time difference. So very interesting topic, and always happy to continue the conversation in whichever way it might be edifying for all of us.
Absolutely.
Super, thank you.
So if you have any questions or comments, you can reach us at podcast@eltinchile.com, and don't forget to like and subscribe, and you can visit our excellent website www.eltinchile.com. So Kevin and Javier, thank you very much.
Thank you.